The footage is still out there, sitting on servers, archived on hard drives, replayed in courtrooms and in the nightmares of the people who survived. These are not horror movies. These are not simulations. These are real moments, caught by real cameras, in the final seconds before everything went wrong. And what makes them so haunting is not the disaster itself, it is what came just before it. The ordinary, the routine, the almost normal. A man checks his watch, a child laughs, a pilot adjusts his headset, and then the world changes forever. This is the story of those moments, the ones no one saw coming, the ones the cameras never forgot, and the ones that still ask the question we cannot stop asking. What would you have done if you had seen it coming? Welcome to Dark Files. Let us begin in the early morning hours of February 1st, 2003. The skies over Texas were still dark when NASA's Space Shuttle Columbia began its final descent back to Earth. The mission had been a success. 16 days in orbit, a crew of 7, hundreds of scientific experiments completed. Inside the shuttle, the astronauts were strapped in, helmets on, smiling. Cameras mounted inside the cabin captured them joking with each other, checking their instruments, preparing for the landing that was supposed to be routine. One crew member gave a thumbs up. Another looked out the small window at the pinkish glow building around the shuttle's nose as it entered the atmosphere. That glow was supposed to be there. That was normal. What was not normal, what nobody on the ground yet fully understood, was happening on the left wing, where a piece of foam insulation the size of a briefcase had struck the thermal protection tiles during launch 16 days earlier. The damage had been reported. Engineers had raised concerns, but the decision was made to proceed. The cameras kept rolling. The crew had no idea. At approximately 5:89 in the morning, ground controllers watching their screens saw something terrifying. The temperature sensors on the left wing began failing one by one, each reading dropping off the display like a light going out. Within 60 seconds, Columbia broke apart over the skies of Texas at an altitude of nearly 40 miles, traveling at over 12,000 miles per hour. All 7 crew members were lost. The footage from inside the cabin, recovered later from debris scattered across hundreds of miles, showed the crew calm and composed right up until the moment communication was lost. They never knew. And somehow, that makes it harder to watch. The Columbia disaster is a story about warning signs ignored, about institutional pressure overriding individual concern, about the dangerous gap between knowing something might be wrong and accepting that it probably is. It is a pattern that appears again and again in the history of disaster. We see it in the footage. We see it in the faces. And nowhere is that pattern more painfully visible than in the story of a bridge, a camera, and a summer afternoon in Minneapolis. On August 1st, 2007, the Interstate 35W Bridge over the Mississippi River was carrying rush hour traffic across its span, when at 6:05 in the evening, it collapsed. In total, 13 people were killed and 145 were injured. But what makes this disaster so deeply unsettling in the age of surveillance is how many cameras were watching. Traffic cameras, security cameras, a camera mounted on a construction vehicle parked on the bridge itself. All of them recorded the same thing: cars moving, people going home from work, workers finishing their shift near a section of the bridge that had been under repair, a school bus with dozens of children on board. And then, in a matter of seconds, the entire central span simply dropped. The footage is almost impossible to comprehend. One frame, a bridge full of vehicles; the next, nothing but dust, falling steel, and water. Investigators later determined the bridge had a critical design flaw: undersized gusset plates at key connection points, and that the additional weight of construction equipment and materials placed directly over those weak points that day had been the final push. The bridge had been rated as structurally deficient since 1990, 17 years of inspection reports, each one noting the flaws, none of them resulting in closure. The cameras on August 1st did not capture a surprise. They captured the inevitable. There is something specific that happens to the human mind when it watches footage like this. Psychologists call it the hindsight illusion, the sense that the outcome was obvious all along, that we would have seen it coming, that someone should have stopped it. But the people in that footage were not negligent or reckless. They were engineers, inspectors, and administrators working within systems that moved too slowly, communicated too poorly, and prioritized the flow of traffic over the safety of the people on it. This is the real darkness in these recordings. Not the disaster itself, but the infrastructure of decisions that made the disaster possible. And that infrastructure is invisible on camera. What the camera shows is only the final moment. What it cannot show is the years of choices that led there. Nowhere is this truer than in the aviation industry, where the development of the black box, the flight data recorder and cockpit voice recorder, has created one of the most detailed and heartbreaking archives of final moments in human history. Consider the last flight of Air France 447 on the night of June 1, 2009. The Airbus A330 en route from Rio de Janeiro to Paris, with 228 people on board, entered a region of turbulent thunderstorms over the Atlantic Ocean at around 2 in the morning. What followed was a chain of events that lasted just over 4 minutes. The autopilot disconnected. The speed sensors, called pitot tubes, iced over and gave contradictory readings. The pilots, disoriented and receiving conflicting information, made a series of inputs that sent the plane into an aerodynamic stall, a condition where the wings are no longer generating lift. The cockpit voice recorder captured the confusion in real time. Alarms sounding, voices overlapping, a co-pilot pulling the nose up when he should have pushed it down, a counterintuitive response that training had not fully prepared him for under those conditions. The captain, who had been resting in the back, rushed to the cockpit but had only seconds to assess what was happening. At 2:14 in the morning, the aircraft struck the surface of the Atlantic Ocean at nearly 11,000 feet per minute. All 228 people aboard were lost. It took nearly 2 years to find the black boxes at the bottom of the ocean. When the recordings were finally analyzed, investigators pieced together those 4 minutes with devastating precision. 4 minutes. That was all the time there was between the first warning and the end. And in those 4 minutes, the cameras and recorders captured not incompetence, but something far more sobering: the limits of human performance under conditions that exceeded what training had prepared for. The aviation industry has spent decades turning tragedies like Air France 447 into lessons. Cockpit procedures were changed, stall recovery training was revised, pitot tube designs were improved. This is the strange, painful covenant of the black box, that the recordings of the worst moments are used to prevent the next worst moment. But not every industry has a black box. Not every disaster leaves behind a clear recording. And not every warning comes in the form of a person, a worker who filed a complaint, an engineer who raised her hand, a whistleblower who sent an email. And sometimes that warning is also caught on camera, not in the disaster itself, but in the testimony that followed. On April 20th, 2010, the Deepwater Horizon oil drilling platform exploded in the Gulf of Mexico, killing 11 workers and triggering the largest marine oil spill in history. In the hours before the explosion, workers on the rig were dealing with a series of pressure test anomalies, readings that suggested something was wrong deep in the well. There are accounts, later confirmed by testimony and internal communications, of workers expressing concern, of arguments about whether to proceed, of decisions made that prioritized the speed of completion over caution. The explosion itself was captured on a camera mounted on a nearby vessel, a massive fireball rising into the night sky over the Gulf. And somewhere in that fireball and in the black water below it were the 11 men who did not make it off the rig. Their names were Jason Anderson, Aaron Dale Burkeen, Donald Clark, Stephen Curtis, Roy Wyatt Kemp, Carl Kleppinger Jr., Gordon Jones, Blair Manuel, Dewey Rivette, Shane Roshto, and Adam Weiss. The footage recorded the fire. It did not record their names. That is what we must do. Because this is the thing that footage cannot capture, the thing that no camera can hold, the full weight of a human life. The wife waiting at home, the child who drew a picture for their dad and left it on the kitchen table, the birthday next week that will now go uncelebrated. The footage shows us the moment. It does not show us the aftermath. And the aftermath is where the real story lives, in the hospitals, in the courtrooms, in the grief counseling sessions, in the quiet houses where someone's chair at the dinner table stays empty. These are the places the cameras do not follow.
And yet, the footage still matters. It matters because without it, we might look away. Without the image, we might choose comfort over confrontation. The footage forces us to see, and seeing, even when it's hard, is the beginning of doing better. Let us move now to a different kind of camera, the kind we carry in our pockets. On November 18, 2013, a Metrolink commuter train in California collided with a truck at a grade crossing in Oxnard. 3 people were killed and over 30 were injured. Bystanders at the scene filmed the aftermath on their phones. But what is perhaps more significant is what led up to the accident. A truck driver who stopped on the tracks became confused and was unable to move the vehicle in time. The crossing had no advanced warning systems beyond the standard signals. In the aftermath, investigations revealed that grade crossing safety improvements that had been proposed and funded had not yet been implemented